Imagine this: you're sitting alone in a quiet room. No distractions, no notifications, no voices, just silence. For most of us, that silence is uncomfortable, even unbearable. But what if I told you that within that silence lies the greatest teacher of all? What if I told you that the answers you've been searching for in books, videos, and conversations have been waiting for you in the one place you've been avoiding, your own silent mind? Today, we're going to embark on a journey into the profound philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer, who believed that silence, not noise, not chaos, was the key to understanding life, yourself, and the world around you. And trust me, by the end of this, you won't just look at silence differently, you'll crave it. Schopenhauer once said, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." This single line contains an entire universe of wisdom. Think about it: how often do you allow yourself to truly be alone? Not physically alone, but mentally, spiritually alone, free from the constant bombardment of stimuli that shapes your thoughts, your personality, and even your desires. Schopenhauer believed that the more we immerse ourselves in the noise of society, the further we drift from who we really are. In silence, we strip away the masks we wear for others. We confront the raw, unfiltered version of ourselves. And let's be honest, that's terrifying, isn't it? Because silence has a way of exposing truths we don't want to face. But why is silence such a powerful teacher? To understand that, we need to first understand what Schopenhauer called the will. He described it as the fundamental driving force of all life, a blind, irrational desire that compels us to act, to seek, to want. Most of us spend our lives enslaved to this will. We chase after possessions, relationships, achievements, thinking they'll bring us happiness. But here's the kicker: they never do. Schopenhauer argued that satisfaction is always temporary because the will is insatiable. It's like filling a bottomless pit. In silence, however, something remarkable happens. The noise of the will starts to fade. The endless cravings, the restless desires, they lose their grip on you. For a brief moment, you experience what Schopenhauer called the negation of the will. And in that state, you find a kind of peace that's deeper and more profound than anything the external world can offer. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, so silence is peaceful. Big deal. How does that help me in real life? Here's where it gets practical. When you embrace silence, you develop something that's increasingly rare in today's world: clarity. Schopenhauer wrote, "The task is not so much to see what no one yet has seen, but to think what nobody yet has thought about that which everybody sees." In other words, silence allows you to see the world and yourself with fresh eyes. It's in silence that you start to question the assumptions you've been living by. Why do I want this? Why am I chasing that? Do these things truly matter to me, or have I been conditioned to think they do? These are the kinds of questions that lead to breakthroughs, to real change. But you can't hear the answers if you're constantly drowning in noise. Let me share something personal. There was a time in my life when I couldn't stand silence. I filled every moment with music, podcasts, videos, anything to avoid being alone with my thoughts. But then I started experimenting. I'd sit in a quiet room for just 5 minutes, doing nothing. At first, it was excruciating. My mind raced with anxieties, regrets, to-do lists. But over time, something incredible happened. The chaos began to settle. Patterns emerged. Ideas surfaced. I started to understand myself in ways I never had before. And it wasn't because I read a book or watched a tutorial. It was because I listened. Not to the outside world, but to the voice within. Schopenhauer believed that this kind of introspection was essential for living a meaningful life. He wrote, "The greatest achievements of the human spirit are those that no one can see." Think about that for a moment. In a world obsessed with visibility, likes, views, followers, What Schopenhauer is saying feels almost revolutionary. He's telling us that the most important work we can do is invisible. It's the work we do in silence, away from the spotlight, when no one is watching. It's the work of understanding ourselves, mastering our minds, and aligning our lives with what truly matters to us. But let's be real, silence isn't always comfortable. It can be brutal. In silence, you're forced to confront your fears, your insecurities, your failures. And that's exactly why it's so valuable. Schopenhauer argued that most people avoid silence because they're afraid of what they'll find in it. He wrote, "To overcome difficulties is to experience the full delight of existence." Silence is one of those difficulties. It's not easy to face yourself, but when you do, you come out stronger, wiser, and more grounded. You stop being a prisoner of your own mind and start becoming its master. Here's a challenge for you. After this video, I want you to spend 10 minutes in silence. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just sit and observe your thoughts. Notice how they jump from one thing to another, how restless they are. And then, notice what happens when you don't fight them, when you just let them be. You might be surprised at what you discover. You might realize that the answers you've been searching for aren't out there. They're in here, waiting for you to listen. So why does this matter? Because our world is louder than ever. Every day we're bombarded with information, opinions, advertisements, all competing for our attention, and in the process, we've lost touch with ourselves. We've forgotten how to think deeply, how to sit with discomfort, how to find meaning in the spaces between the noise. Schopenhauer's philosophy is a wake-up call. It's a reminder that silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of something deeper. It's where we find ourselves, our purpose, our truth. Now that we've touched on the power of silence and its ability to reveal our true selves, let's dive deeper into how Schopenhauer saw this as a path to wisdom and ultimately liberation. He believed that silence was not just a tool for introspection, but a profound way to transcend the suffering inherent in life. To understand this, we need to explore one of the core ideas in his philosophy, the nature of suffering. Schopenhauer famously wrote, "Life is a constant process of dying." This might sound bleak at first, but think about it. From the moment we are born, we're subject to decay, loss, and impermanence. Our desires constantly pull us in different directions, and even when we achieve something we've longed for, the satisfaction is fleeting. The endless pursuit begins again. This, Schopenhauer argued, is the essence of human existence, an unrelenting cycle of wanting, striving, and suffering. It's a hard truth to accept, but it's also liberating, because once you see it clearly, you can start to break free from it. So, what does silence have to do with this? In silence, you begin to notice how much of your suffering is self-inflicted. You realize how often your thoughts dwell on past regrets or future anxieties, neither of which exist in the present moment. Schopenhauer observed, "The greatest wisdom is to make the enjoyment of the present the supreme object of life, because that is the only reality, all else is the play of thought." Silence teaches us to anchor ourselves in the present, to let go of the mental chatter that keeps us trapped in cycles of pain. It's not about escaping reality, it's about seeing it clearly, without the distortions of our restless minds. There's another layer to this. Schopenhauer believed that much of our suffering comes from identifying too strongly with the will, that force within us that constantly craves, desires, and seeks. When we're caught up in the will, we're like puppets, pulled in every direction by our impulses. But in moments of silence, we can step back and observe the will for what it is, a blind, insatiable force. This detachment is crucial. Schopenhauer wrote, "The wise man leads a life of quiet contemplation and strives to gain insight into the inner essence of existence." Silence allows us to become the observer rather than the one who is endlessly driven by desires. It's in this state of detachment that we find a kind of freedom, a freedom from the tyranny of the will. But let's get practical again. How do you apply this in your daily life? Start by creating intentional moments of silence. Think of them as mental detox sessions. Maybe it's 5 minutes in the morning before the chaos of the day begins. Maybe it's a walk in nature without your phone. Whatever it is, use that time to simply observe your thoughts, your emotions, your surroundings. Don't judge or try to control anything, just be. Over time, you'll notice a shift. You'll begin to see patterns in your thinking, the ways you sabotage your own peace. And once you see those patterns, you can start to change them. Schopenhauer didn't just stop at silence as a tool for personal growth. He saw it as a gateway to something much larger, a deeper understanding of existence itself. He wrote, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." This is a profound statement. It means that most of us live our lives trapped in a narrow perspective, shaped by our personal experiences, biases, and desires. Silence has the power to expand that perspective. When you quiet the noise of your own mind, you start to see the interconnectedness of all things. You realize that your struggles, your joys, your fears, they're not unique to you. They're part of the human condition. This realization can be humbling, but it's also deeply empowering. It reminds you that you're not alone, that your life is part of something much larger than yourself. One of the most transformative insights Schopenhauer offers is the idea that true happiness doesn't come from fulfilling desires, but from transcending them. He wrote, "It is difficult to find happiness within oneself, but it is impossible to find it anywhere else." This is why silence is so essential. It creates the space for you to turn inward, to confront the root of your unhappiness, and to find a sense of peace that isn't dependent on external circumstances. In a world that constantly tells us to look outward, to buy this, achieve that, become someone else, Schopenhauer's message is a radical act of self-reclamation. Let's take a moment to reflect. How often do you allow yourself to simply be, not to achieve, not to consume, not to impress, but to just exist? Chances are, not often, and it's not your fault. We live in a culture that glorifies busyness, that equates worth with productivity. But here's the thing, the most valuable insights, the ones that truly change your life, don't come from doing more. They come from doing less. They come from creating space, mental, emotional, and spiritual, for those insights to arise. Schopenhauer understood this deeply. He wrote, "A quiet mind is like a calm sea. The surface is clear, and the depths can be seen. Silence is how we calm the storm within, how we access the depths of our own wisdom." Now, let's address something important. Embracing silence doesn't mean withdrawing from life. It doesn't mean isolating yourself or rejecting the world. In fact, it's the opposite. When you cultivate silence within, you're better equipped to engage with the world in a meaningful way. You're less reactive, more present, more intentional. You stop being a prisoner of your circumstances and start becoming the architect of your life. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he said, "The art of not letting oneself be governed is the art of not letting oneself be disturbed." In silence, you reclaim your power. You stop being governed by the noise of the world and start living in alignment with your own truth. So, where does this leave us? Silence isn't just a practice, it's a way of being. It's a commitment to living authentically, to facing the discomfort of your own mind, to seeking wisdom in the stillness. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. Because in that silence, you'll find something that no amount of noise can ever give you yourself. Now that we've explored the transformative power of silence and its connection to self-discovery and liberation, let's take this journey even deeper. Schopenhauer didn't just see silence as a personal refuge, he saw it as a way to transcend the illusion of individuality and connect with the greater truths of existence. This is where his philosophy becomes truly profound, and practical wisdom turns into something universal, even spiritual. Let's explore how silence not only frees us from the chaos of the will, but also opens the door to understanding the essence of life itself. Schopenhauer believed that much of human life is rooted in illusions about who we are, what we want, and what will make us happy. He wrote, "The world is my representation. What does this mean? It means that the reality we experience is not the world as it truly is, but the world as we perceive it. Everything we see, think, and feel is filtered through the lens of our own mind, shaped by our desires, fears, and biases. In silence, however, we begin to strip away those filters. We start to see things more objectively, not as we wish them to be, but as they are. This process of seeing clearly is a kind of awakening. It's like stepping out of a dark room into the sunlight, and yet it's not always comfortable." Schopenhauer warned that most people resist this kind of clarity because it forces them to confront truths they'd rather ignore. He wrote, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot do what he wills." This is one of his most famous and misunderstood ideas. It means that while we think we're in control of our actions, our desires themselves are beyond our control. They arise from the will, that blind, insatiable force driving all life. In silence, you come face to face with this reality. You realize how much of your life is governed by impulses you didn't choose, by a will you cannot fully master. And yet, this realization is the first step toward freedom. Here's why: when you become aware of the will's grip on you, you can begin to loosen it. You can stop being a slave to your desires and start living more intentionally. This is what Schopenhauer called the negation of the will. It's not about suppressing your desires or denying yourself pleasure. It's about no longer being controlled by them. It's about finding contentment in the here and now, rather than constantly chasing something out of reach. This is where silence becomes not just a practice, but a state of being. In silence, you're not running from the world or trying to change it. You're simply existing fully and peacefully in the present moment. But let's go even deeper. Schopenhauer believed that when we quiet the will and embrace silence, we tap into something universal. He wrote, "The individual is merely a phenomenon, not a thing in itself." This means that who you think you are, your name, your body, your personality, is just a surface-level manifestation of something much deeper. Beneath it all, you are part of a greater whole, a universal essence that Schopenhauer called the will to live. In silence, we can glimpse this truth. We can feel our connection to all life, to the vast, interconnected web of existence. This realization is both humbling and empowering. It reminds us that while our individual lives may be fleeting, we are part of something eternal. Now, this might sound abstract, so let's bring it back to the practical. How does this understanding change the way you live? For one, it makes you more compassionate. When you see yourself as part of the greater whole, you stop seeing others as separate from you. Their struggles, their joys, their fears, they become your own. Schopenhauer wrote, "Compassion is the basis of morality." Silence nurtures this compassion by dissolving the barriers between you and others. It helps you see beyond the surface, beyond the noise, to the shared essence that binds us all. Another way this realization changes you is by shifting your priorities. When you understand that the things you've been chasing, wealth, status, recognition, are just fleeting illusions, you start to focus on what really matters. You begin to value experiences over possessions, relationships over achievements, being over doing. This is the kind of clarity that only silence can bring. It's not about rejecting the world or renouncing all ambition. It's about aligning your life with your true values, with what genuinely brings you fulfillment. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest obstacles to embracing silence: fear. For many of us, silence is uncomfortable because it forces us to confront our own mortality. Schopenhauer didn't shy away from this topic. In fact, he believed that an honest confrontation with death was essential for living a meaningful life. He wrote, "The fear of death is the beginning of philosophy, and every philosophy worthy of the name must begin with an account of this fear." In silence, we are reminded of our impermanence. We are forced to face the fact that everything we cling to, our possessions, our achievements, even our identities, will one day be gone. But here's the paradox: by accepting this, we become free. When you stop running from the reality of death, you start living fully. You stop wasting time on things that don't matter. You stop letting fear control your decisions. Schopenhauer believed that silence could help us make peace with this truth. In the stillness, we come to see death not as an end, but as a natural part of the cycle of life. And in that acceptance, we find a kind of liberation. So, where does this leave you? What's the takeaway from all of this? It's simple, but not easy. Embrace silence, not just as a practice, but as a way of life. Use it to strip away the illusions that keep you trapped. Use it to confront the truths you've been avoiding. Use it to connect with yourself, with others, and with the greater whole of existence. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of wisdom, clarity, and peace. It's where you find not only yourself, but also the answers you've been searching for all along. Schopenhauer once said, "Happiness belongs to those who are sufficient unto themselves." In silence, you discover that you are sufficient. You realize that you don't need to chase, to strive, to prove anything. You already have everything you need to live a meaningful, fulfilling life, if only you're willing to listen. And with that, I leave you with a question: when was the last time you truly listened? To yourself, to the world, to the silence? Maybe it's time.